Hey, so in this quick video we're going to be talking about short stories and some of the concepts you need to know for short stories. So first thing, you need to know that short stories, just because they're short doesn't mean they're any less complicated or anything than a novel. As this says here, you can do a lot in a few words. So in this video we're going to be talking about four things: plot, theme, character, and figurative language. You have discussed those things before, however, we're going to just remind you of those before you get into the lesson. So first, let's talk about theme. Theme is the lesson that you, the reader, can learn about being human from the text. Theme is not main idea or topic. Theme is what about the human condition is this story trying to tell you? Every story has a theme that goes with it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that theme only goes with that story. So, for example, the story of Hansel and Gretel, one of the themes could be that you shouldn't be greedy. Now, although not being greedy goes with Hansel and Gretel, not being greedy could also be a theme of other stories as well. It's a theme about being human. So to find the theme in a short story after you've read it, you should ask yourself, what can I learn about life from this story? What can I learn about my life from this story? If you ask yourself that question, that's how you get the theme. The next thing that we're going to talk about is character. So here I got a couple characters. Here we can draw another character. I know I have gorgeous drawings of character, but as you can see, the characters are the people in the story. Sometimes there's only one character, sometimes there can be lots of characters, and how they interact can make up the meat of the story. So, protagonist is a certain kind of character in a story. Pro means first, so protagonist is the main character of the story. The protagonist is the person that has the conflict that's going on and is driven by that conflict. In most stories, the protagonist is the person that is focused on the most. So, next we are going to talk about plot. Quite simply, plot is what happens in a story. It's all these small events that keep happening that make up a story. So if you were to read a story and then someone asks you real quickly afterwards what happened in the story, those few events that you would be talking about, those would be the plot. Here is a plot diagram with which you will be working in this course. It kind of looks like a mountain. Not all stories have the same exact, short little thing here, long, short, short. They're all kind of different variations of this, but this is just something to learn from. So first, in a plot, you have the inciting moment. Inciting means beginning. Then you have the exposition. The exposition is where you learn about the characters and the setting and perhaps the conflict. Now if you look right here where the line goes from being flat to going up, where it goes from exposition to rising action, that's where your conflict starts to get worse. Your conflict is the main problem that your protagonist has. So rising action, because the action keeps getting rising, up, up. Okay, you can think that the conflict is getting more involved, more complicated. And each of these little dots here, that would be an event in the plot that's making that conflict more complicated. So what are those little dots called? They are called complications. Now, we keep getting complications in our conflict until we finally at last get to the climax of the story. Now, climax doesn't necessarily mean the worst part of the story or when the conflict gets the worst. All it means is that it's the turning point of the conflict. You can see up until that point things are getting more complicated. At that point things start getting less complicated and going towards the resolution. Now the part where it's getting less complicated here is called the falling action, opposite of the rising action. We have rising action up to the climax, falling action after the climax, which is usually shorter than the rising action. And then lastly, we have the resolution, where the conflict, in most stories, is resolved, comes to some sort of ending. In fancy French, we call it the denouement. You should know that term too. So as you can see here in this plot diagram, it's kind of a mirror of itself. We have flat, up, we got the turning point, down, and flat again. So you're going to be working with this plot diagram in the course. If at any point you get confused, you can always go back to this, and there's lots more information on the internet as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about is figurative language. So obviously we're going to talk about language. The two types of figurative language that we're going to focus on in this lesson are similes and metaphors. You've probably heard of similes and metaphors before, especially if you've ever studied poetry. So let's get into what they mean. So, a simile is when you compare two things using the words like or as. For example here, we can see that we have a teacher, and I'm going to write a simile about a teacher. I love my teacher like I love my mom. So you can see I'm comparing my love for a teacher with my love for a mom. Now what do I learn about that as the reader? Well, we usually can infer that people really, really, really love their moms. They're their moms, right? And so if I'm saying I love my teacher like I love my mom, that means I must really love my teacher. Another simile here. Reading a book is as comforting as eating some macaroni and cheese. Well, I don't really know how I can draw macaroni and cheese, but let's just say that's macaroni and cheese. Now, what can I learn from that simile? Well, I know as the reader, here, I'll fix that bowl a little bit. I know as the reader that eating macaroni and cheese is usually really comforting to people. They really love to do it. So for this person who wrote the simile, reading a book must be really comforting as well. The next example of figurative language that I want to look at is metaphor. Now, metaphors and similes, people get confused pretty easily because they are pretty similar. So similes compared two things using like or as. A metaphor also compares two things, except the difference here is there is no like or as. So here's a quick little metaphor. She is the Red Bull of my morning. So what am I comparing? I'm comparing Red Bull to whoever she is. So I have to think here, what is this person trying to tell me about this girl? Well, I know Red Bull has lots of caffeine. People usually use it to wake up, get going, and they're talking about morning. So this person, she, apparently really gets this person excited and gives them energy. So I know what we are comparing. That's my metaphor. But I'm not using like or as, they just have the word is. So, in summary, this video was about some of the characteristics of short stories, including theme, the life lesson that you, the reader, are to learn from reading a short story, character, the people in the stories, and protagonist, the main character that has the conflict in the story, plot, what goes along in the story, what happens, including exposition, conflict, rising action, climax or turning point, falling action, and resolution or denouement, and figurative language, including metaphor and simile.